1 hour after the first wave of the Japanese attack, President Franklin Roosevelt received word from the Secretary of the Navy, William Franklin Knox, that Pearl Harbor was bombed. President Roosevelt replied with a surprising 2 words, "Oh God." He requested more information from Frank Knox about the attack, but was told that all he knew was that there was major destruction. About this time, 8:55 a.m., the second wave of the Japanese attack was approaching to bombard Pearl Harbor. Even though President Roosevelt did not know that there was a second wave on its way to Pearl Harbor, he thought that the facilities in the Philippines were the next target for the Japanese. Due to the president's concern, he called General Douglas MacArthur, the head of the Philippine facilities at the time, to inform him to expect an attack. However, he was unable to get in touch with MacArthur.
"3 hours and 25 minutes after the first wave of attack, President Roosevelt finally decided that he would obviously have to request a declaration of war. Since all of his writers that prepared speeches were not present at the time, President Roosevelt had to write his own speech. While writing the most important speech of his presidency, he included many commas and periods to add emphasis to the speech. President Roosevelt also believed that the speech had to be short and to the point so the American people would actually listen to him speak. When President Roosevelt had Cordell Hull, his Secretary of State, read the speech, he thought it was too short and that he needed to add more details to motivate the American people and get them to support the war. President Roosevelt replied simply by saying no. He said that if he wrote a long 30-minute speech, people would start to tune him out and not listen to the severity of the attack.
It was not until 5 hours and 45 minutes after the attack that President Roosevelt got a clear, detailed picture of the intensity of the attack and the destruction caused by the Japanese. When he heard about the devastation, it especially surprised him that the Japanese sunk 21 United States Navy ships. Since President Roosevelt was a Navy sailor, he knew how big these ships were and how hard it was to sink them. When he got this report, he was also confused by the fact that the United States was basically caught with their pants down. He was angry that the Japanese were able to destroy Navy and Army aircraft that was on the ground rather than the planes being in the air. "6 hours after the attack became the darkest part of President Roosevelt's career. He said yes to the internment of Japanese Americans. President Roosevelt thought that the Japanese might have done the same thing that Adolf Hitler did before he invaded countries. What he thought the Japanese might have done was send spies and Japanese people into the United States to prep for an invasion. Therefore, what President Roosevelt did was arrest every single Japanese citizen of the United States and put them into internment camps. So ultimately, every Japanese American was guilty until proven innocent." At this time, President Roosevelt's secretary finally got a hold of General MacArthur and told him about Pearl Harbor and to be on alert. General MacArthur assured President Roosevelt that his tails were in the air and he was prepared for anything the Japanese could throw at him. Unfortunately, a couple hours later, President Roosevelt received a phone call that the Philippine facilities were attacked. The call was disturbing because General MacArthur did not put his planes in the air, and within 2 minutes, half of his fleet was destroyed.
"7 hours after the first wave of the Japanese attack, President Roosevelt called a meeting of his cabinet to hear his speech. To get his cabinet there as fast as he could, he said that this is the most important cabinet meeting since 1861, which started the Civil War. When his cabinet arrives, he tells them everything from the names of the ships that sunk to how many men died. After he revealed the heartbreaking truth, he read his speech, and every single cabinet member thought that the speech should be longer and that the president should give more details. Shockingly, President Roosevelt went against his entire cabinet and said no, because the American people would not listen to a longer speech. After his cabinet meeting was over, he started to play around with the wording of his speech and changed world history to infamy. Because of this change of wording, the opening line of President Roosevelt's speech became one of the most memorable quotes in American history. If President Roosevelt did not change that phrase, many Americans would have tuned the speech out because it did not give the power that infamy gave. Around this time, President Roosevelt met with the congressional leaders to talk about the incident of Pearl Harbor and to request a meeting with the Senate and the House of Representatives the next day. While he was explaining the incident, he left out many important details and gave them a brief description of the attack. He did this so the leaders would not have the desire or the ability to tell anyone the exact details.
"17 hours and 35 minutes after the attack at Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt's phone rang. When he picked the phone up, he received news that the British colonies of Singapore and Malaysia were attacked. He also found out that Winston Churchill, England's Prime Minister, was going to ask Parliament to declare war within the hour. When President Roosevelt heard this, he instantly thought that he would be considered a coward for declaring war after Churchill. Therefore, President Roosevelt decided to call him up, but unfortunately, he could not get a hold of Churchill in time. This gave President Roosevelt all the more reason to give a determined and driven speech to show the American people he was ready to lead the United States into war. "23 hours and 15 minutes after the Pearl Harbor attack, President Roosevelt made the most important walk of his career to the podium. Since President Roosevelt had polio, he was paralyzed from the waist down. Therefore, he had to create an illusion of walking by using his cane and son. Reporters say that during this walk, his face looked determined and he looked ready to lead the United States into war. Surprisingly, though, his son told reporters after the speech that what the president was actually thinking was "don't fall." He thought this because if he fell, the American people would have said and possibly believed that how can a paralyzed man lead a country into war?
Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. In addition, American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. I believe that I interpret the will of the Congress and of the people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the uttermost, but will make it very certain that this form of treachery shall never again endanger us. Hostilities exist. There is no blinking at the fact that our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.